Your four favorites are The Doom Generation, Law of Desire, Queen Margot, and Alice in Wonderland. Belladonna of Sadness involves sex and violence like The Doom Generation. Like Law of Desire, characters are driven by desire, power, and sexual control. It takes place in medieval France, which isn't the exact same time period as Queen Margot, but it's sort of close. And just like Queen Margot, the story starts off with a couple of newlyweds. And it's an animated film with some psychedelic motifs like Alice in Wonderland. The Devils has the sex and violence of The Doom Generation, the melodramatic vibe and characters driven by sexual obsession like Law of Desire, historical and religious context, and an operatic atmosphere like Queen Margot, and the feeling of being in a world gone mad like Alice in Wonderland. Orlando is a historical film involving aristocratic Europe like Queen Margot. Like Alice in Wonderland, it has a dreamlike, whimsical, playful logic. Like Law of Desire, it explores the fluidity of gender and sexuality. And like The Doom Generation, there's this drifting feeling, because the characters in The Doom Generation are kind of drifting throughout the country, and here the protagonist is drifting through time. Funeral Parade of Roses, like The Doom Generation, involves queer young people navigating a stylized, sexual, and violent world. Like Law of Desire, it's about desire and obsession, and some of the characters are trans, like Tina in Law of Desire. Like Queen Margot, it's got beauty, rivalry, excess, violence, and tragedy. And like Alice in Wonderland, it has a dreamlike structure. Possession, like The Doom Generation, depicts people behaving in destructive ways. Like Law of Desire, characters are driven by lust, obsession, and madness. Like Queen Margot, it involves passion and violence and stars Isabella Johnny. And like Alice in Wonderland, some moments almost feel like a dream or nightmare rather than grounded in reality. Rapture came to mind when I was watching Law of Desire because it's a Spanish film where one of the characters is a filmmaker and it depicts someone driven by obsession that borders on the brink of madness. Plus, the director of Law of Desire is in this movie. Like The Doom Generation, characters engage in self-destructive behavior. And like Alice in Wonderland, it feels like we're watching someone go down the rabbit hole trying to piece together clues to make sense of something. Valerie in Her Week of Wonders, like Alice in Wonderland, is a surreal fantasy coming-of-age film about a young girl. It involves sexuality and violence like The Doom Generation and Law of Desire, and religion plays a role in the narrative like Queen Margot. Daisies has this playful, chaotic energy and a nonsense, dreamlike logic like Alice in Wonderland. Like The Doom Generation, it feels anarchic and rebellious. Like Law of Desire, there's a feeling of excess and theatricality, and like Queen Margot, it feels like there's a breakdown of social order. Viridiana has a surreal vibe like Alice in Wonderland, with religious themes like Queen Margot and sex, destruction, and a dark sense of humor like The Doom Generation and Law of Desire. The Rules of Attraction has that youthful, chaotic, sexual energy of The Doom Generation, and like Law of Desire, it's about a love triangle, desire, and jealousy. The Wolf House, like Alice in Wonderland, is an animated film that feels like a fairy tale. It's based on actual events like Queen Margot, and it's got this dark, almost apocalyptic feeling to it like The Doom Generation. Similarly, Alice is another adaptation of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but with a darker vibe. Y Tu Mama Tambien is a coming-of-age movie like Alice in Wonderland, a road movie like The Doom Generation, and it's an erotic film with a love triangle like Law of Desire. The Story of Adele H is a historical French film starring Isabella Johnny like Queen Margot, and it depicts obsessive, unrequited love like Law of Desire. Damage, like The Doom Generation, depicts people engaging in destructive behavior. It's got an obsessive, erotically charged narrative like Law of Desire. And like Queen Margot, it captures how an affair can set off a chain of events and have major consequences. Farewell My Concubine has a historical background and feels almost operatic like Queen Margot, and it's got melodrama and intense emotional attachment like Law of Desire. Breaking the Waves, like Queen Margot, involves religion and adultery, and it's got melodrama and romance like Law of Desire. The Doom Generation is part of Gregg Araki's Teenage Apocalypse trilogy, and you didn't have the rest of the trilogy marked as watched. My intuition tells me you've seen these movies and just didn't mark them as watched on Letterboxd, but it would feel wrong for me to not recommend them if you haven't seen them, so just in case, I think you'd love Totally Effed Up and Nowhere. Blue Velvet, like The Doom Generation, has this stylized depiction of America that feels ominous and surreal. Like Law of Desire, it's fueled by obsession, desire, and lust. And like Alice in Wonderland, it almost feels like the protagonist enters a strange new world. Natural Born Killers is a hyper-stylized, violent, sexually charged road movie like The Doom Generation. Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down is from the director of Law of Desire, features some of the same actors, and has a similar sense of eroticism and passion. Plus, it's a dark comedy like The Doom Generation. Coraline, like Alice in Wonderland, is an animated film about a young girl entering a surreal alternate world. Donkey Skin has this surreal fantasy, fairy tale musical vibes of Alice in Wonderland, and involves kings and queens with hints of incest like Queen Margot. And I just want to throw in this last one because I thought it was a fun little coincidence. In The Doom Generation, a character mistakes Amy for his ex and calls her Bambi. And Bambi is an animated Disney film like Alice in Wonderland, and they actually reused a scene from Bambi in Alice in Wonderland.